Hello and welcome to Press TV's News Analysis, coming to you live from Tehran. I'm Marzia Hashmi. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, the end of Israel will come if it attacks the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is according to the commander of the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps, Mohammad Ali Jafari. Now, he also says he believes it is just a matter of time before Israel attacks Iran, but he reiterated if Tel Aviv does so, the Israelis will regret it. We will be zooming in on this issue and what it could mean for the region and the world on this news analysis.
The commander of Iran's Islamic Revolution Guards Corps says Israel's hostile policies will eventually lead it toward waging a war against Iran. He says any such attack could spell the end of the Zionist regime, as Iran is fully prepared to repel, quote, any insane move by Israel. A day before the IRGC commander's remarks, President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who was speaking on the opening day of Iran's Defense Week, said the Zionists are seeking to create crises in the world. Apart from threats of military action against Iran, many believe Israel is behind the production of the anti-Islam film that was produced in the United States and sparked global anti-U.S. protests. U.S. media reports show 100 Zionists paid for the production of the blasphemous movie that led to the killing of the U.S. ambassador to Libya. Scores of protesters have also died in protests that followed the broadcast of parts of the movie on YouTube, as Google refused to remove the film. Israel once again managed to pit Muslims against Christians and Christians against Muslims. The United States has had to pay a high price for its support of Tel Aviv in the past 6 decades. The U.S. government has lost its credibility because of its unequivocal backing for Israel against the Palestinian people. The U.S. supported Israel's war against Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. However, the United States has refused to back an Israeli war against Iran. That's made many wonder whether it's a PR move ahead of the November presidential election, or America's finally come to its senses and realized that Israel is more of a liability than an asset.
I'd like to welcome our guest to the program from San Antonio, Texas, political commentator and broadcaster, Mr. Mark Dankoff. From Washington, historian and investigative journalist, Mr. Gareth Porter. And from Beirut, political analyst, Mr. Kamel Wazni. Thank you all for being with us. So, well, I'd like to start this off with Mr. Dankoff. Now, Tehran has heard many threats for years from Tel Aviv about attacking Iran. Why do you think that Israel has not attacked Iran until now?
Perhaps it might be that the American military might be having some second thoughts about this, and the basis of the disasters in Iraq and Afghanistan. That might be one angle. I mean, recently you had General Martin Dempsey making some public statements indicating that he didn't want to be signing on to an Israeli attack on your country. General Zinni made the rather sarcastic but very telling remark that if one liked Afghanistan, if one liked Iraq, that one would love Iran. It may be that there are at least a few sane voices in the American military and intelligence communities who are trying to overrule Netanyahu, trying to talk sanity to the president, and trying to overrule the very powerful Israeli lobby in the Congress. This might be one angle, I'm not sure.
Okay, what's your take on it, Mr. Porter? How likely do you think that they will be able, as Mr. Dankoff said, that there are some sane voices over there. Do you think that they will be able to actually stop, I'm talking about Washington, to be able to stop Israel from launching any type of attack?
Well, actually, I'd go further than Mark Dankoff in regard to the position of the U.S. military on this issue. I think it's been very clear since the Bush administration in 2007 that the U.S. military services, the heads of services and the top military officials in the United States have been absolutely and adamantly opposed to an attack on Iran by either Israel or the United States. When Vice President Dick Cheney put forward a suggestion that had in mind trying to exploit an incident, an attack in Iraq that could be blamed indirectly on Iran, the Pentagon and the U.S. military jumped all over that and insisted that, okay, you have to tell us what is going to be the step-by-step escalation of this and where does it end. And that was quickly scuttled. And I think that that position has continued, I think, even more strongly during the Obama administration, with Dempsey taking the lead. And my understanding, and I reported this in January, is that he went to Israel and spoke with both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Ehud Barak and told them that if the Israelis did in fact attack Iran unilaterally, that they could not expect the U.S. military to come to their assistance. And I think that is really the significance of the Dempsey remark in Britain, which has been given such wide publicity. And I think there's no doubt that it was said with the full support and authority of the White House.
Well, let me turn back to San Antonio now. Mr. Dankoff, Gareth Porter's just said that basically then Tel Aviv would not be able to rely on Washington. How likely do you think that is? If Tel Aviv actually launched an attack, do you think that Washington, do you think that they would try to actually force the hands of Washington? And do you think that Washington would just be able to sit back and let it happen without getting involved themselves?
I think that we would be involved because of the power of the Israeli lobby in the American Congress and because of the power of the Israeli lobby in our news media. What I'm particularly afraid of is a false flag incident that Israel would use as a pretext for attacking Iran with full American support, something that could be pinned on Iran that in fact would be undertaken by the Israeli Mossad, as I believe was the case with 9/11. Frankly, when I look at this delisting of the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, or MEK, this week as a terror organization by the U.S. State Department, when clearly the MEK has blood-stained hands all over it for many, many, many years, it seems to me that when we understand the relationship between the MEK and the Israeli Mossad and all kinds of things going on in Iraq and in Iran and in Syria, it seems to me that the MEK would make for an excellent candidate for pulling off a false flag incident either in that part of the country or in that part of the world or in this country, the United States. It's not an accident, for example, that Cy Hirsch of the New Yorker has reported that the MEK, when it was still listed as a terror organization by our State Department, was receiving paramilitary training in this country in a secret base in Nevada, courtesy of the United States Central Command. So we have to ask ourselves a question. If 9/11 was a false flag attack, as I have argued that it was, and as I have told your Kurash Ziabari with Fars News Agency recently that I believe that it was, and that Israel was the core player behind that, there are all kinds of things that they could arrange to ensure that American public opinion would suddenly become inflamed, that suddenly there would be a reversal of these poll numbers on these wars, and that the public would be suckered into supporting this monstrous thing when it's not in the interest of the United States. It's certainly not in the interest of the world.
Okay, well, let me turn to Beirut and get Kamal Wazni in on this discussion. What about the possibility of false flags? There are many that say this recent attack on Islam's Prophet with that movie, that actually it initiated in Israel, trying to, it's sort of like another false flag attack, trying to get people to react a certain way. Now, our guest in San Antonio has talked about a greater version of a false flag attack with the MEK. What's the possibility of that in Israel initiating some type of false flag attack in order to bring the United States on board?
I think at this point, I think the American is at full a problem at home and abroad, and I think the United States tried to distance itself from the Israeli position. So far, the American, they provided Israel with a lot of support, with a lot of weapons. But my estimate and the reports that we have been reading, they haven't supported them with the aircraft necessary to launch an attack or the ammunition that will be used in any attack. I think the statement that's coming from the Americans, especially from the Chief of Staff, Mr. Dempsey, General Dempsey, he was very clear when he indicated to the Israeli, you cannot launch an attack by yourself. So any attack against Iran, it has to have the approval and the blessing of the United States. Otherwise, will not happen. So if such an attack ever happen, it is the United States who's gonna be behind it, and it's the United States who's gonna be responsible for it. And I think at this point, at this juncture of history, I think the United States trying to downsize its position in the Middle East. They withdraw from Iraq. They're looking to withdraw from Afghanistan by 2014. I think they're heading with their aim and military to Asia to face probably the great Chinese power, and I think they start preparing for a Cold War with the Russian.
Do you think, Mr. Wising, let me just jump in here. Do you think then, you say that you don't think that the United States really want to expand or get into another war in the Middle East? Do you think it is pressure from Washington right now that is preventing Tel Aviv from launching an attack?
I think the pressure, and Israel doesn't have the means or the strings to launch a war against Iran. You have to look at it from both sides. Well, Israel doesn't launch a war because it doesn't have the means, and the other side is very strong and capable and determined. We don't have to undermine the capability of the Iranian and their strong will to defend their country and the technology that they acquired in the past 30 years. The Iranian are formidable force able to defend themselves and to launch a counterattack at Israel. The Israeli knows very much that any stupidity by the Israeli, this will be countered by the Iranian mighty and whoever that support Iran across the world. Any war against Iran is going to be a holy war against Israel, and it's going to be the end of Israel. I think the United States knew this very well, and the Israeli playing stupidity in this game, and they know they cannot dare to attack Iran, not because they don't want to, but because they know what is the price that will be if they attack Iran unilaterally. They think and they hope that they will get the United States to engage in an attack, but I think the United States at this point, we're down by wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Their military capability is wore out. Look at the casualty that they had. Look at the injury that they had out of Iraq and Afghanistan. I think the number is staggering. You're looking at the U.S. talking about maybe between 300,000 and 600,000. They have this kind of injuries that has to do with a personal disorder because of these wars. I think the United States military is not capable today to launch a war or want it to be a war. And on the other hand, not to mention the economic cost for any war. The United States now will pay a dear price, and the world economy will pay a dear price if such an attack will happen. The oil price will jump over $250 at the start of any speculation of a war, and this will bring a depression to the United States and bring depression to the rest of the world, because it would be the biggest tax on the U.S. economy. And I think the important things, any attack will not succeed in its mission, because the Iranian, the technology that they have, is not a location, it's a knowledge that they acquire, and this is not going away. Any attack will not yield the result that the Israeli or the American wanted. Iran, it has the right to be a nuclear for peaceful technology, and I think it's not gonna change if attack happen or it doesn't happen.
Okay, what about that, Mr. Dankoff, what our guest in Beirut has said, that Iran also is quite a power. Do you think, let's look at it from the militaristic perspective, do you think that Israel is looking at that aspect of it, that they know if they attacked, that it will be responded towards. And of course, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard today, Commander Jaffery, said that if this attack takes place, it would mean the end of the Zionist regime if that happens. Your take on his comments?
Well, I think that these comments are very well taken, and frankly, I agree with everything that our guest from Beirut has said today. I wish he was running for the presidency of the United States and that we could get rid of Barack Obama and Mitt Romney and have this gentleman in there, maybe in conjunction with Pat Buchanan or Ron Paul, because everything that he says is exactly true. Unfortunately, there were plenty of rational reasons for the United States not to invade Afghanistan or Iraq either, and yet we did, and we have been paying the price for that ever since. It seems to me that when you, again, look at the power of the Israeli lobby, that irrationality and sheer power alone many times overweigh all kinds of sane, rational decisions and policies and game plans, such as the one that our guest from Beirut has very carefully and finely articulated. To me, it gets back to a couple of things. One is that Israel is not simply interested in removing Iran as a regional power player, but Israel also understands that in terms of demographic statistics, that the Zionist state is history just on the basis of birth rates and population differentials alone. Pat Buchanan has talked about this in his latest book, and it seems to me that when you examine it from this vantage point, one particularly horrible scenario is that Israel's desire to engage in their Eretz Yisrael vision, which is to expand their territories from the Nile River to the Tigris-Euphrates River, will need a pretext of a major war to enable that to happen. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we get back to is this whole business of false flag operations. It, to me, is not an accident, for example, that shortly after March of 2001, when Ehud Barak stepped down as the Prime Minister of Israel, that he showed up in the United States. And he was in the United States as a representative of a company called SCP Holdings. That company, in turn, was working with two registered companies in Wayne, Pennsylvania, who specialized in the making of nanothermite, the very type of super nanothermite that I believe and many other people believe was involved in bringing down the Twin Towers in New York and bringing down Building 7 in New York. If that is factual, and it's just one of the things that Israeli citizens Michael Chertoff and Philip Zelikow weren't going to investigate when it comes to what happened at 9/11, then we are in fact looking at a scenario where Israel and their cohorts at the Project for the New American Century deliberately created a pretext with this false flag attack in the United States, just as they attempted to with the USS Liberty attack in 1967, to create the climate for a full-fledged war in the Middle East that would have the full-fledged, overt backing of the United States, complete with hundreds of thousands of American troops if need be. Now, this is an insane scenario, as your guest in Beirut has quite carefully and quite rightly articulated. But I don't know that we're dealing with sane people when it comes to the kind of Zionist fanaticism that has characterized some of the most radical elements in the Likud government in Israel. We're certainly not dealing with sanity when it comes to the Christian Zionist fanatics in the United States, like John Hagee of Cornerstone Church, who are supporting the Zionist entity and anything that it does.
Well, let me turn back to Washington and get Gareth Porter in here because we're almost out of time. What do you think needs to be done to avoid Israel attacking?
Look, I think that what we haven't talked about here is the fact that that Prime Minister Netanyahu has, from the beginning of his administration, been using this idea that Israel, that he might well be forced to attack Iran if the Iranians if the problem of Iran's nuclear program is not solved, meaning that the Iranians would agree to scrap the entire enrichment program, the uranium enrichment program. This has been his strategy from the beginning. He has used the notion, the perception that Israel might attack Iran to put pressure on the United States and other Western countries, as well as Russia and China, to try to do so, to get them to put very much more harsh sanctions on Iran, and also to push the Obama administration in the direction of a confrontational posture toward Iran. That has been the biggest objective of Netanyahu's perceived threat. Now, the fact is that he has never actually threatened to make war against Iran. I've carefully studied the record, and the fact is that Netanyahu has been actually more cautious than his predecessor, Ehud Olmert, the government of Ehud Olmert, was with regard to threatening Iran. What Olmert, the Olmert government said was that if the Iranians don't cease and desist the uranium enrichment program, that Israel will in fact attack Iran. The Netanyahu government has never gone that far. They have always said, well, the options are all on the table, we reserve the right to defend ourselves and so forth. They've been very careful never to make the explicit threat. I think there's a very good reason for that, and I think the reason is that the Israeli IDF, the defense forces, have been very clear with the leadership of Israel saying, we cannot have you making a threat that you're not willing to actually carry out, because then our credibility is going to be ruined, and thus we will not be able to intimidate the Lebanese, the Hezbollah, and Syria and Iran. And so that is, I think, the underlying reality here, that this has been essentially a bluff all along, and I think that it has now failed miserably for a variety of reasons we're not going to have time to go into.
Okay. Well, Mr. Kamal Wazni, last question goes to you. As Gareth Porter just said, he thinks it's been a bluff all along. Do you think that Tel Aviv is bluffing?
I think the days when the Israeli can threat is over. The Israeli, they're not in position to threat anybody on the Middle East, and not to threat Lebanon, not to threat the Iranian. Those days are over. They're not fighting the old days when they fought Egypt and they fought Syria. These days gone. Today, the mighty power of a new regime that is capable and able to defend and to counterattack is taking place. The Israeli have to move on. Their threat is a hollow, doesn't mean very much. I think on the other hand, you have to be ready if such a stupidity come out, and if such stupidity come out, I think the response can be horrific against Israel, and they can make if they make that mistake.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We are out of time. I appreciate you being with us, Mr. Mark Dankoff from San Antonio, political commentator and broadcaster, Mr. Gareth Porter from Washington, historian and investigative journalist, and Mr. Kamal Wazni in Beirut, political analyst. And thank you, viewers, for being with us. Join us same time, same place tomorrow. I'm Marzieh Hashmi signing out for the news analysis right here in Tehran. Thank you so much, and goodbye.